Well, hello, First Baptist Arlington, and welcome to another midweek update from your pastor. Today is Wednesday, and at the moment of this recording, our nation is continuing to wait to hear the outcome of this election for president, obviously, and certainly many other candidates just all down the line in every state in America. And so we're still waiting to see what the results of this election are going to be. And it's just a reminder that we are part of a nation. We're part of a free society, and we had the opportunity to go and cast our ballot. Cindy and I did that, and had an opportunity to express our personal opinion, if you will, when we cast those votes, and it's certainly a privilege. And it's just a reminder of something that's just at the very heart of who our nation is. We're a democratic republic, which means that we get the chance to vote and express ourselves in that very way. And it's a privilege and a responsibility, and we certainly don't take it lightly. And I'm grateful for that, and grateful for this nation, and I pray for our nation that God would continue to bring healing and would guide us with His hand. Well, speaking of nations, this is Missions Month here at First Baptist Arlington, and behind me are some flags that represent nations. In our sanctuary right now, there are some flags as well that represent nations. You know, the Bible has something to say about that, of course. I know you're familiar with the Great Commission, where Jesus said this in Matthew 28, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I will be with you always to the very end of the age." Now, you know that the New Testament was not written in English, it was written in Greek. And when you look at this Greek text, when Jesus says, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations," the word that's translated nations is the Greek word ethne. And you probably hear an English word there as that word's been transliterated over into English. And so our word ethnicity comes from that word, ethne. And it can be translated nations, can be translated peoples. For us, when we hear the word nation, that typically refers to a geopolitical identity. In other words, it is a place that you can find on a map that has geographical boundaries, and it has a certain political identity. And our world has over 200 of those. From a missions perspective, in our work from a missiological idea, we historically have looked at the world as a collection of nations. In fact, missiological strategy for much of the era of the modern mission era was actually driven by a geopolitical perspective, if you will. However, in the late 70s and early 1980s, missiologists began to reevaluate that approach. And they began to recognize and teach that from a missiological perspective, in other words, when you're trying to take the gospel across the world, when you're trying to do what Jesus said do, take the gospel to the nations, what these missiologists like Ralph Winter and several others began to tell us was this: from a missiological perspective, the world is not just a collection of nations, of geopolitical identities. The world is actually a collection of peoples. And those peoples tend to identify ethnically and linguistically. And so these missiologists actually began to evaluate that, and they have decided, and it has certainly shifted our strategy, they have decided that these ethno-linguistic groups are the ones that really need to be reached. And sometimes those ethno-linguistic groups may spill across a national boundary. And so they may have more in common with someone who lives on the other side of the border in another nation than they do with the bulk of the people who actually live in the geopolitical phenomenon that's known as their own nation. So it's really a fascinating development that took place in missiology. And so we have embraced that even as a church. Our strategy has been guided by our desire to fulfill the Great Commission. We believe God is leading us to do just that. And so what Missions Month is all about really is just a reminder of that calling to take the gospel to the nations. And this month, you can find our First Focus magazine. It's actually online, as well as you can get a copy of it here at the church. And Ashley has challenged us to embrace this theme, the church unleashed. And the point is, we want the church to be unleashed here at home, and we want the church to be unleashed across the world so that we might penetrate those ethno-linguistic groups with the gospel. And so as a church family, our ministry starts right here in our own backyard, and we're engaged in all kinds of mission efforts here locally. We then have our own church people that volunteer to go on trips. And so our church sponsors those trips, and we send people to targeted areas where we're trying to take the gospel to the nations as Jesus commanded us to do. Sometimes our strategy is very specific. So for example, in Costa Rica, we're primarily working among one ethno-linguistic group, the Cabakar. So not the entire nation of Costa Rica, but we've targeted that ethno-linguistic group to try to get churches planted among the Cabakar, and we've spent years engaged in that. You know that in West Africa, we have highlighted the needs of the Fulani, which is a particular ethno-linguistic group. And we have sent teams, we've actually sent workers to live there through the years as we're trying to have opportunities to see the gospel grow and flourish among the Fulani people. We've sent hundreds and hundreds of our church members on trips over the last 19 years since I've been here as your pastor. And we have gone to Asia, and we've gone all across the state of Texas. We've gone to the border. We've gone to the west, to places like Washington. We've gone to New York City. We've gone to Chicago. We've gone to Boston. Here across the U.S., we have certainly gone into multiple places into Mexico and certainly in Costa Rica and all across West Africa and in several places in Asia as well. But the point is, our goal is to continue to mobilize the church so the church can be unleashed to take the gospel to these places in the world where we know there needs to be a gospel witness. And then on top of that, we have decided to actually send workers from our church to live in some of these places where they can become the focal point. They can become a nexus, if you will, of ministry. And so we've established 3 global mission centers across the world. 2 of those are in Europe, in Central Europe, and 1 in Western Europe, and the other one's in West Africa. And we have folks from our church who are actually sent by our church who are living in each one of those global centers. Gabe and Seda are in our West Africa Center. Ryan and Sarah are in our Central European Global Center. And Emily and Guillermo are in our Western Europe Center. And they have specific responsibilities as they are highlighting the needs of the people within their sphere of influence. And our church sends teams to support them. And we provide financial resources and project money so that we can mobilize people to take the gospel into those various communities. And so guess what? You were a part of all of that. Through your prayers, as you support these folks in prayer, you're connected as a church family to all of that work that literally blankets this world as a part of this church's calling to the Great Commission. Through your financial contributions, when you give to the World Mission Offering or when you give to the general budget every Sunday, a portion of our budget goes to support all this mission work. It goes to support the infrastructure, if you will, so that we can take the gospel in tangible ways across our nation, across our state, across our city, and literally all the way across the world. And when you give to the World Mission Offering, you're giving a targeted gift, if you will, that helps support and undergird the direct work that we're doing across the world. And on top of that, our church is engaged in significant partnerships with strategic partners because we know we can't shoulder this responsibility all by ourselves. We're just one church, and in the grand scheme of things, we're a small church if you look at the population of the whole world. So it's not something that we can do on our own. We can't fulfill the Great Commission on our own, but we can do our part. And when we do our part and we connect with other strategic partners, and we have many of them, then we're able to accomplish so much more than we could ever accomplish on our own. And it's a beautiful picture, if you will, of the church being unleashed across the world. So during this missions month, I want to encourage you, I want to challenge you to do some things. First of all, I just want you to pray. I want you to be in prayer for the mission efforts that our church is a part of. Be in prayer for these workers. Be in prayer for the peoples to whom they're called. Be in prayer for just the proclamation of the gospel as that is taking place in these various places across the world where we've chosen to partner and invest. I want to encourage you to give financially to the budget and give financially to the World Mission Offering, because when you do that, you are directly connected to the work. You're supporting that work and you're making it possible so that others might be able to go even if you can't. And then I realize we're in this pandemic and the COVID virus has been very challenging for us, and it's made it difficult for us to to send any teams anywhere or anything like that. I understand that, but it's not always going to be that way. We're going to somehow emerge out of this and get on the other side of this. And so perhaps one of the things that you can pray about is when it's your opportunity to perhaps go, that then you can actually go and see some of this work for yourself, see it with your own eyes, go on one of these trips, or at least get invested and answer God's call to one of these places in the world and just become more actively engaged in what's taking place through the ministry of our church and that particular thing. You may not feel called to all of it, but maybe there's one spot in it that you feel called to. And if so, let me encourage you to ask God to show you how you might be personally invested in that particular place where our church right now is engaged in mission. So I'm excited about what the Lord is doing through the life of our church. This month is a strategic month for us as we're reminded of the calling to take the gospel to the nations. So I'm looking forward to seeing how God is going to use our church family in doing that very thing in the days ahead. God bless you, and I hope to see you soon.